The morning of June 15th, 1986, began like any other in Ibirapuera Park. The sun rose timidly between the centuries-old tree canopies, and the first visitors were already walking along the main avenues, enjoying the fresh morning air that was slowly dissipating. Among them was Eliza Martins, a 32-year-old woman who worked as a secretary in an accounting office in downtown Snow Hollow. She was taking her 8-year-old twin children, Samuel and Beatrice, for yet another Sunday outing at the city's largest park. The family had a sacred tradition of visiting the park every weekend, using the green space to run, play, and breathe away from the intense traffic and the suffocating pollution of the bustling city of Snow Hollow. Eliza had arranged to meet her childhood friend, Camila Ferreira, near the park's artificial lake while the children played on the newly renovated playgrounds. Samuel and Beatrice were well known throughout the neighborhood for their boundless energy and natural curiosity, which led them to explore every corner they discovered. They always explored every nook of the park with enthusiasm, but never strayed too far from their mother, respecting the strict rules she had set for their safety. On that sunny Sunday morning, however, something would be completely different from the usual. While Eliza chatted excitedly with Camila about the events of the week and plans for the upcoming school holidays, the twins asked for special permission to go to the duck area, located about 50 meters away, near a wooden bridge that the children loved to watch. Since it was a place perfectly visible from where they were sitting and frequently visited by other families with small children, Elisa agreed without hesitation, only asking them to return promptly in 15 minutes for the snack she had prepared for the outing. Samuel, always the more adventurous of the two, grabbed his sister Beatrice's hand and ran towards the lake, where dozens of ducks swam peacefully and other children threw breadcrumbs they had brought from home. The 15 minutes agreed upon quickly passed, turning into half an hour, then 45 minutes, and finally a full hour. Elisa began to feel a growing concern in her chest when she could no longer spot the children near the duck lake. She and Camila immediately stopped their conversation and began a systematic search of the surrounding areas, walking briskly and calling out the children's names, their voices becoming louder and more desperate. Other park visitors, noticing the women's distress, soon offered to help with the search, spontaneously forming small groups that scoured different parts of the park with dedication and solidarity. The natural maternal concern quickly transformed into absolute despair when, after 2 intense hours of fruitless searching throughout the park's visible perimeter, there was no sign, no trace, and no clue about the whereabouts of the twins. The children seemed to have simply vanished from the world, as if they had been swallowed by the earth. Elisa, her hands trembling uncontrollably and her voice choked with emotion, decided to immediately go to the park's administration office and officially report the disappearance to the relevant authorities, hoping that a more organized and professional search could locate Samuel and Beatrice quickly. The park's security guard, Vicente Almeida, a 45-year-old experienced man with a distinctive gray mustache, was the first official staff member to be alerted to the incident. Vicente had worked at the park for over a decade and was intimately familiar with every trail, every dense area of vegetation, every abandoned building, and every isolated spot where adventurous children tended to hide or wander unsupervised. He had built a solid reputation among his colleagues for his dedication and efficiency in emergency situations. Immediately after receiving Elisa's desperate report, Vicente organized a much larger and more structured search team, which included all the available staff members that Sunday and several volunteers who had offered to help with the search efforts. The military police were officially called around 11 a.m. through a phone call made by Vicente from the park's administration office, and the case began to take on much larger and more serious proportions. The official protocol for missing minors was automatically activated, Mobilizing human and technical resources specialized in such cases, Detective Igor Konha, from the 12th Precinct responsible for the Ibirapuera area, arrived at the park with a full criminal investigation team in the early afternoon. Around 1 p.m., Igor was a meticulous, experienced, and highly dedicated professional with 15 years of police career and extensive experience in delicate child disappearance cases. He knew perfectly well that the first 24 hours were absolutely crucial for the success of any search operation and for the chances of finding the victims alive and safe. Following the standard procedures established by the civil police, Igor immediately began a series of detailed interviews with the children's mother, all the witnesses present, and the park employees who were working that Sunday. Elisa, despite being in a state of shock and emotional despair, provided extremely detailed and precise descriptions of the clothes her children were wearing on that fateful day. Samuel was wearing a light blue t-shirt with a colorful image of a popular superhero among children at the time, and dark jeans he had received for his birthday. Beatrice was wearing a light pink dress with small white flowers printed on it and new white sneakers she had specifically chosen for the park outing. During the first few hours of intensive investigation, several specific and concerning points immediately caught the attention of the police and the specialized investigators. Ibirapuera Park had several entrances and exits spread across its vast perimeter, some of which were traditionally poorly monitored on weekends due to the limited number of available security staff. Additionally, the dense and closed native vegetation area near the exact spot where the children were last seen by witnesses offered multiple possibilities, both for natural hiding spots and escape routes that could be used by potential criminals. Detective Igor, demonstrating his experience and technical knowledge, immediately ordered that all entrances and exits of the park be strictly monitored by military police and that a systematic, methodical, and thorough search be conducted in every designated area of the park, including areas typically closed to the public and administrative buildings. The initial investigation revealed disturbing information that completely changed the perspective of the case. Several people who had been at the park that morning reported having noticed a suspicious-looking man watching children near the playground and play equipment areas. The descriptions provided by the witnesses were somewhat vague and even contradictory in some details, but all consistently pointed to someone of middle age, wearing dark clothes and a cap that partially hid his face. One of the most precise and reliable witnesses, Patricia Barbosa, the mother of 2 young children who were also playing in the area that Sunday, specifically reported seeing this mysterious man on several consecutive Sundays, always completely alone and always watching families with children attentively, with behavior that she considered strange and inappropriate. Another extremely relevant and concerning point emerged during a detailed interview with Deborah Rodriguez, an experienced employee at the park's official snack bar who had worked there for over 5 years. She specifically mentioned serving soft drinks and snacks to a couple of suspicious appearance and nervous behavior about 2 hours before the children disappeared. The man and the woman appeared visibly nervous, constantly looking around and asking specific and unusual questions about the exact opening hours of the park, the presence and number of security guards, and the opening and closing routines. Deborah described the couple as seemingly ordinary-looking people, the woman with dark, long hair tied in a ponytail, and the man completely bald, wearing dark-framed glasses. The third consecutive day of intensive searches brought both an important and extremely disturbing discovery for the investigation. Ton Lopes, another experienced park guard who knew every inch of the land, was conducting a careful and systematic sweep through an area of particularly dense and closed vegetation when he found some personal belongings that unquestionably belonged to the missing children. About 200 meters from where Samuel and Beatrice were last seen by witnesses, Carefully hidden among thick bushes and dense foliage were one of Beatrice's white sneakers and Samuel's characteristic blue t-shirt. The items were in conditions that clearly suggested that the children had passed through that specific spot at some point after their disappearance. But there were no other visible signs, footprints, or any other evidence of their presence or any possible companions. The location of the objects, hidden and difficult to access, indicated that someone had deliberately placed the belongings there, possibly to mislead the investigation or create false leads about the real whereabouts of the victims. The discovery of the personal items dramatically intensified the investigation and introduced completely new and darker theories about what might have happened to the children. Detective Igor began to seriously consider the real possibility of a planned kidnapping, especially after further investigations revealed that Eliza Martins worked as a secretary in a medium-sized company, had a stable financial life but no significant wealth, and that the family did not have substantial financial resources that would justify a ransom-driven kidnapping. This realization led the specialized investigators to explore other, more disturbing motivations for the crime, including personal revenge against the family, acts carried out by people with severe mental disorders, or even crimes motivated by unhealthy obsessions with children. All these possibilities were equally terrifying for the parents and the local community. During the fourth week of intensive investigation, when the case had already gained significant media attention locally and nationally, a new important lead emerged through the detailed testimony of Claudia Millo, a 70-year-old retired woman who had lived for decades in a residential building located near the park. Claudia specifically reported having heard sharp, desperate screams from children on the night of June 15th to 16th, clearly coming from the direction of Ibirapuera Park. At the time of the incident, she had interpreted the sounds as young people causing a ruckus or engaging in late-night play, something relatively common in the area during weekends. However, after learning through the television about the children's disappearance, she immediately decided to report what she had heard to the authorities. Even weeks after the fact, weeks inevitably turned into long and agonizing months, and the case of the missing twins in Ibirapuera Park quickly became one of the most talked about, followed, and debated cases in the city of São Paulo and all over Brazil. The local and national media gave extensive coverage to the case, with daily reports on major news broadcasts and special features in print newspapers. The family received emotional and logistical support from various specialized organizations that helped in the search for missing children, including volunteer groups, psychologists, and lawyers who offered their services free of charge. Eliza Martins, showing admirable strength and determination even in the face of tragedy, never lost complete hope of finding her children alive and safe. She actively participated in all searches organized by volunteers, tirelessly collaborated with all police investigations, gave interviews to the press whenever requested, and maintained constant contact with other families going through similar situations. Detective Igor Kunal, in turn, systematically explored several different lines of investigation over the months following the disappearance. One of the priority lines involved a thorough check of the criminal records of all park employees, including outsourced staff, occasional service providers, and even former employees who had worked there in the past 5 years. Another specific line of investigation focused on individuals with a proven history of crimes against children throughout the metropolitan area of São Paulo and neighboring cities. A third possibility, explored with equal dedication, was the hypothesis that the children had accidentally gotten lost in the park's dense vegetation and suffered some kind of natural accident, such as falls, animal attacks, or even drowning in one of the park's artificial lakes while trying to find their way back to their mother. 6 full months after the initial disappearance, in the cold December of 1986, an absolutely macabre and unexpected discovery would completely change the course of all investigations and bring definitive, though terrible, answers about the fate of the twins. During a routine tree trimming and cleaning operation in a traditionally little frequented area of the park, specialized municipal employees found human remains buried in a superficial and improvised manner among the intertwined roots of centuries-old trees. The location of the discovery was approximately 500 meters away from where the children's personal belongings had been found a few months earlier, in an even more isolated and hard-to-reach area, known only by very old park employees and a few people who had frequented the spot for years. The clues were piling up, but the mystery remained. If you're trying to solve this case with me, leave your theory in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The official forensic examination, carried out by specialists from the Snow Paulo Medical Legal Institute, definitively confirmed that the remains found belonged to Samuel and Beatrice Martins. A detailed forensic report indicated that the children had died from severe cranial trauma caused by violent blows delivered with a blunt object, and that the bodies had been clandestinely buried during the night of June 15th to 16th, precisely, confirming the time of the desperate screams heard by Claudia Mello coming from the direction of the park. The discovery brought a complex mix of relief and unbearable pain for Eliza Martins, who finally had a definitive answer about the fate of her beloved children, but now faced the devastating and irreversible reality that they had been dead for months, brutally murdered by someone who had yet to be identified by the authorities. With the official confirmation of the children's deaths through the forensic examination, the case officially transitioned from a disappearance to a double homicide. Detective Igor dramatically intensified all investigations, mobilizing additional resources and now focusing specifically on identifying and capturing the perpetrator or perpetrators of the brutal crime. The scientific and detailed analysis of the location where the bodies were found revealed partially preserved footprints in the damp soil, some fabric fibers that didn't belong to the victim's clothing, and a few other forensic pieces of evidence. That became absolutely critical to the development of the criminal investigation. The in-depth investigation revealed that the specific location where the bodies were buried was known only by very old park employees, people who had worked in maintenance for many years, and a few people who had frequented that area for decades. This realization significantly narrowed the circle of potential suspects, focusing the investigation on a much smaller and more specific group of people. Among the main suspects was Marcelo Oliveira, an experienced gardener who had worked at Ibirapuera Park for 15 consecutive years and knew all the vegetation areas in detail, including the most isolated and hard-to-reach spots. Marcelo had unrestricted access to the park at all times, including early mornings and holidays, and possessed all the necessary professional tools to dig the place where the bodies were clandestinely buried. Another important suspect was Fabio Araujo, a 40-year-old unemployed man with a proven medical history of severe mental disorders, who had frequented the park daily for over 2 consecutive years. Several people, including employees and regular visitors, had seen him on multiple occasions talking to himself, gesturing violently, and exhibiting strange and disturbing behaviors near the areas where children typically played. Fabio had a fixed job for years and literally spent most of his days in the park, knowing every corner, trail, and hiding spot. The third main suspect was Monica Gomes, a 35-year-old single woman who had demonstrated obsessive and inappropriate behavior toward the children who frequented the park over the months. Several employees reported that Monica often tried to start conversations with unsupervised children, offering candies, toys, and treats without the parents' permission, and demonstrated detailed knowledge of the routines and schedules of various regular families. She lived alone in an apartment rented near the park and had free access to the location at almost all hours of the day and night. During the formal interrogations conducted at the police station, Each of the three main suspects provided completely different versions of the facts and alibis that needed to be carefully verified by the investigators. Marcelo Oliveira categorically claimed to have been working in a completely different area of the park at the exact time of the children's disappearance and presented two colleagues as witnesses to his alibi. However, when the colleagues were formally interviewed, they only confirmed a specific part of his alibi, leaving a critical period of approximately 2 hours completely unverified and without witnesses. Moreover, Marcelo showed excessive and visible nervousness throughout all his statements. He constantly sweated, stammered when answering simple questions, and contradicted himself on several important points about his exact work routine that Sunday. The breakthrough in the case came through a more detailed and specific scientific analysis of the microscopic fabric fibers found at the site where the bodies were clandestinely buried. The specialized technical expertise determined that the fibers specifically belonged to a standardized work uniform, worn exclusively by maintenance and gardening staff at Ibirapuera Park. This scientific discovery, combined with the growing inconsistencies in Marcelo Oliveira's alibi, led investigators to focus their attention and resources on him as the main suspect. An official and thorough police search of Marcelo's residence uncovered clothing with suspicious stains that could be human blood, as well as professional gardening tools with traces of soil, the chemical composition of which exactly matched the specific soil composition where the children's bodies were found months later. Confronted directly with all these scientific and forensic pieces of evidence, Marcelo initially continued denying any involvement in the crime, but his version of events continued to present increasingly obvious contradictions that were impossible to explain. The decisive turning point in the investigation came when Deborah Rodriguez, the experienced employee at the park's snack bar, was called for a new and more detailed interview. This time, with more time and calm to recall the events, she was able to remember much more specific and accurate details about the strange couple she had served the day of the disappearance. Her detailed physical description of the man exactly matched Marcelo Oliveira's appearance, and she was able to positively identify him without hesitation from a lineup of photographs presented by the specialized investigators. Faced with all the accumulated scientific evidence, the positive identification by the witness, and the inability to explain the contradictions in his alibi, Marcelo Oliveira finally decided to fully confess his barbaric crime. He revealed that he had developed a disturbing and obsessive fixation on children over several months, and that on that fateful Sunday, he had deliberately followed Samuel and Beatrice when they strayed from their mother's supervision to go to the duck area. According to his detailed confession, recorded in a notary's office, Marcelo claimed that initially his intention was simply to talk to the children and perhaps play with them, but he completely lost control when Samuel and Beatrice began to scream desperately and tried to run away upon realizing something was wrong with the strange man. Marcelo confessed to taking the terrified children to the more isolated area of the park, where he worked daily, falsely promising to show them colorful bird nests and other attractions that would spark the children's natural curiosity. When Samuel and Beatrice finally realized something was definitively wrong and desperately tried to run back to find their mother, Marcelo panicked completely and lost all control. He admitted to brutally striking the two children with a heavy gardening tool, causing the severe cranial trauma that resulted in their instant deaths. After committing the double homicide, Marcelo temporarily hid the bodies in the dense vegetation and waited until the following dawn to bury them definitively in the isolated location where they were later found by municipal employees. He also admitted to deliberately scattering some of the children's personal belongings in different strategic spots across the park, with the specific aim of confusing the police investigation and creating false leads about possible escape routes or other locations where the victims might have been. throughout all the months of intense searching that followed the crime. Marcelo continued working normally at the park, maintaining his usual routine, and even actively participating in some of the search operations for the children, helping to search for victims he had himself murdered and clandestinely buried. Marcelo Oliveira's trial took place in 1987, widely covered by the national and international press and followed closely by the outraged public of São Paulo, shocked by the brutality of the crime. During the entire judicial process, the defense desperately tried to claim the defendant's mental insanity, but official psychiatric evaluations conducted by renowned specialists unanimously concluded that Marcelo was fully capable of understanding the criminal nature of his actions and the consequences of his deeds. He was finally sentenced to 30 years in prison for double homicide, with the aggravating factors applied due to the victims being defenseless minors and the extreme cruelty demonstrated in the execution of the crime. Elisa Martins meticulously followed the entire judicial process from start to finish, tirelessly seeking justice for her murdered children and ensuring that the criminal was properly punished by society. After the trial, she became a dedicated activist in child protection causes and significantly contributed to the creation of much stricter and more effective safety protocols in public parks throughout the city of São Paulo. The tragic case of the Ibirapuera twins permanently and irrevocably changed public security policies in public spaces frequented by families across Brazil, including the mandatory installation of more security cameras, a significant increase in the number of specialized guards, and the implementation of training programs for staff on how to identify suspicious behavior. The memory of Samuel and Beatriz Martins remains alive and respected through the tireless work of their mother Eliza, who never stopped fighting for justice and effective improvements in the safety of all Brazilian children. The case of the Ibirapuera twins remains to this day a painful milestone in Brazilian criminal history, demonstrating how investigative persistence, rigorous scientific work, and collaboration between authorities and society can lead to the resolution of seemingly impossible cases. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. If you like this case, click like and leave a comment about where you're listening from. Enjoy and watch the next video.